because the plane still flies. That's the big thing that I think everyone misses. Like, the plane will still fly in nearly every situation. If it's bumpy, lightning, rain, you can't see anything, it doesn't matter, the plane still flies. And that was a big thing I learned from my old boss, was that, there's a lot of situations you might get into, but just trust the plane. Like, the plane will still fly.
Welcome aboard the HiflyMedia podcast, dedicated to sharing the stories and experiences of the amazing people who make aviation happen. From pilots like me to engineers, air traffic controllers and others. I'll explore their personal journeys, the challenges they've faced and the triumphs they've achieved. My name is Damien and I'll be your host. Whether you're a seasoned aviation enthusiast or new to the field, I invite you to join me as we take off on this journey of discovery. Welcome aboard another exciting episode of the HiflyMedia podcast. Today we have the privilege of sharing the awe-inspiring journey of Josh Villani, a pilot who soared across continents to fulfill his dream. Hailing from the Sunshine Coast in Australia, Josh's path has led him to the skies of Las Vegas, where he's currently navigating the boundless horizons of the aviation world behind the windscreen of an Airbus A320 family airframe for Frontier Airlines. So welcome, Josh.
Good morning.
So, for the listeners' sake, Josh is actually sitting in a hotel room in Dallas, Texas, and Josh and I were going to catch up yesterday, but we couldn't. What happened, Josh?
Yeah, so my original flight was planned to get in a lot earlier, but as I was saying just before, we were about to push back, and we're actually early. And I went to call for my pushback, and the VHF1, the number one radio, wasn't working at all. And obviously that's an issue. Can't be flying around with that. And ended up a big deal, having to swap around computers in the plane and going into the avionics bay with maintenance and doing all of that, which just causes a delay, which was unfortunate. But on top of that, we actually ended up number 32 in line to take off out of Las Vegas as well. So yeah, there's one thing after the other. And I got a screenshot of the flight radar with 32 planes in a big line waiting to take off out of Vegas.
Oh, so my goodness.
My record was 26 out of Newark, but 32 is my new record. 32. And the captain said his record's 54.
Where was that out of? JFK?
Out of JFK. So it took him 2 hours to take off, apparently.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
and any comments from the passengers, or were the self-unloading cargo quiet on the way out?
No, they were good. They were good. They were understanding. The captain was really good. He's really good at communicating. And I think that's something that I'm learning a lot, just watching and being under a few of the captains here. Everything's transparency. Obviously it wasn't a big issue. Nothing's broken per se on the plane that it can fly. It's just a radio. We swapped number 2 into number 1. That fixed that problem. And we have 3 radios at the end of the day anyway. So, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about where it all started, where your itch for aviation came from, and what did that journey look like? What gave you your start?
Yeah, so I think it's nearly like a typical story, like a typical start. I was introduced to aviation at a young age. My grandfather was a private pilot, and he had an aerobatics rating out of Toowoomba. And I believe I was 6 or 7. He wanted to take me up, and they had a CT4, which used to be an ex-Air Force trainer. And I remember I got in the cockpit, and then I didn't want to go, and I just refused. And then I remember I got taken back home, and I could see my dad and grandfather, they went up instead, and I could see them flying and doing loops. And I thought that was actually pretty cool. And then the next time I did it, I think I was 12, I did go up that time, and I was hooked, ridiculously hooked. It's just, that's been it ever since. I think when I was in high school, I saw some jobs that potentially paid more money, like anesthesiologist or something like that.
Right.
But it just always came back to aviation. So that's the way I went about it. When I was 13, I joined Air Force Cadets, and I stuck with that until I was 17, 18, leaving school. So about 5 years. And I think that was a big help. It was a really good introduction into military life, but also they did a lot of aviation classes and like flight principles and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I could absorb some sort of aviation knowledge while being in school without paying so much for it, as in flying lessons.
Yeah, sure.
And that was a big help. So I think that's where it just started from a young age, and just kind of one thing after the other just kept pushing me down a path that just led to where I am today, I guess.
That's cool. I've got a question there. So 5 years of Air Force cadets, is there a reason why you didn't go down the military path?
I did. I spent 2 years in the Army at ADFA in Canberra, with a job as a helicopter pilot when I was to finish that. I didn't follow through with it. My initial intention was always to be an aircraft pilot, and I did try to go in through the Air Force, but it's incredibly competitive and yeah. So I initially had the impression, and from what I was told, that you could, once you were in, you could move around a little bit, but it's just not as simple as that. So when the time came to sign a return of service leave, you had 2 years. I didn't sign it and decided to go the civilian route instead.
Right.
And then that's when I got out of the military and started working and paying for the flying lessons myself.
Right. So you did your civilian flight training then out of the sunny coast. I think it was Maroochy, wasn't it?
Yep. Yeah. So I started on the Sunshine Coast, and I don't know how I found them. From memory, it would have been a Google search, or I would have been to the airport and seen them. But it was just the Aero Club, and I just did a little bit of research prior to that. I knew what they cost. I knew what I was buying. It was kind of like a package.
Mm-hmm. It
was about $500 or $700, I think, from memory. It got you the exams and like 2 flights or something like that. And I remember I walked in, I met a guy named Doug, had a chat about a couple of things, and he's like, "Do you want to go flying?" And I was like, "Do I have to do something?" And he's like, "We can just go." And he's like, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And yeah, so we went. The first aircraft that I flew there was called a Pioneer 200. So they're all RALs aircraft at the Aero Club. It was just a 2-seater, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. And then I stuck with that place for a couple of years, because I just, from whatever I could work and afford to pay, it was when I flew. And I think from memory, from looking at my logbook, it definitely took a while to get any traction. But yeah, that's the first flying club that I was associated with, and that's where it all started on the civilian side of things.
And I'm interested in a word that you just used there, and that was, you said that, looking at your logbook, it took a while to get a bit of traction. What changed that gave you that traction?
So I remember that there's always like a milestone that you have to reach with hours, and so you however much it cost, a couple $100 to pay for an hour of flying. You do that maybe once a week. You try and do a little bit more than that, but it'd probably be once a week. And if the weather's bad, you can't go. If it's strong crosswinds, those planes can handle not a whole lot. Mm-hmm. So that restricted you in a few ways. So it just kept kind of getting pushed and pushed and pushed. I finally went solo, and I remember that because Sunshine Coast I think it's Class D.
Yeah, memory. It is Class Delta.
Yeah, you have to have a medical, and I ran into a problem when I was going through the military that they thought I had a case of color blindness. So it didn't stop me from getting my medical for the military, but it just made it a little bit more difficult. So when I went through that on the civilian side of things, when you do all your initial medicals, you have to go to an eye specialist. And I went to a guy in Maroochy, and he was very, very good and kind of cleared everything up and got signed off, and everything was done. So that took a little bit of time. So I actually remember for my first solo, I had to fly down with an instructor to Caloundra because that's non-controlled and you don't need a medical.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I went solo and then I flew back. So it was an extremely expensive trip.
Yeah.
But that's how I had to do it for the first like 3 or 4 times. And then once you've done solo for a few hours, then you can start taking people. And then after that, you get to a certain amount of hours and you do your tests for your. Anyway, I ended up doing my RPL, my recreational pilots license, and getting that done. I did that one in Gympie.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a good experience because that was the first time I went from a 2-seater aircraft to a 4-seater. I went to a 172. And the guys in Gympie were super nice. And he let me solo after like an hour in the plane.
Yeah, right.
And I couldn't believe it. Yeah, I think I had like 25 or 30 hours in the RAL's aircraft, and maybe 10 or 15 solo as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was good. It was great. That was the first VH registered aircraft that I would fly, and then it kind of died off a bit because that was quite expensive. That one ran a bit of money, and I was pulling money from anyone that I could. You beg, borrow, steal. That was the reality of it. Like you just had to. And it wasn't till I went down the airport on the Sunshine Coast and met a group called ADFA, funny enough, but Aerodynamic Flight Academy.
Ah, yeah.
They don't exist there anymore, but they were running programs of essentially 0 to commercial.
Right.
And by that point, I had about 60 hours of flying under my belt. And he said, you can still do it. You can still we'll teach you from 0 essentially, but you'll have the experience and we'll take you all the way to a commercial. And then that will be done. That was under the vet fee help scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And the other option was to have my private pilot's license, I believe it was, and then go all the way to IFR, or have my commercial pilot's license and then go to IFR, which would have cost an exuberant amount of money out of my own pocket, which I just didn't have and I wasn't going to get.
Sure.
So I chose to do the 0 to commercial, and my thinking was that it got me a commercial license, which legally allowed me to work as a pilot. And from there, I can do the rest. So I signed up to that. It was 5 days a week, and we flew most days. If it was a commercial exam, we would study for a week, do the exam on the Friday, and then go into a week of flying, or we'd do 2 exams back to back and kind of knocked all those out eventually. And just flew till we had the, I believe it was 200 hours for an integrated course at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And got it that way. So by the time I left, I had about 260 hours of flying in total. But that was an amazing group of people. There was like a course of 8 of us, and that was just a lot of fun, like a really, really good time. And then to survive, I would fly through the day. I was then like the manager of an athlete's foot in Noosa, and I would work in the afternoons from like 3 o'clock till close every day. And then I'd work Saturday, Sundays. And then I'd go back to flying through the week and then work every afternoon and then work Saturday, Sunday. So it was 7 days a week for about a year and a half in total, I think it ended up being. Yeah.
That's some dedication there. I'm sure along the way you would have had any number of reasons or excuses to pull the pin.
Yeah, I think I was just having so much fun and I was flying, and I didn't see it coming out of my pocket, which was just brilliant. It's coming out of the government's money. So I'm really thankful for that side of things. I obviously have to pay it back now, but it was all kind of paid for. So when your slot came up and you could fly, you went flying, and it was a lot. We're flying Tobago's TB10s,
mm-hmm.
and TB10s, and some Piper Cherokees, and it was great. I think there was a 172 in there as well for night flying, actually. And it was just fun. It was the instructors were really, really good guys, still good friends with all of those guys. One of the other students that I was with, he followed me over to America. I got him a job to come over here, and now he flies a 777 cargo around the world.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it's been really cool to see the progression of a couple of us that did stick with it and made it. In some way, it worked out. But yeah, so we're still good friends that are still helping each other out. 6 years later, I think now. So yeah,
that's awesome. And that really speaks to that community or the network of aviation. In being a case of, in some cases, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
It is. It seriously is. I can't say that enough of how much it's who you know than what you know, because everyone has a commercial license. Everyone has a night rating. Everyone has their IFR. Everyone has an IFR multi. Like that's just standard stuff. So it's all about what you can add to yourself to make you more employable. And I think that's what I learned, especially with my first and second job. Once I did get into the workforce side of things, that I could add to the company, and that made me more employable to them, which was what they needed more than just a pilot, because they could get that from anywhere.
And I'd really like to unpack that for the listeners' sake, especially, for any aspiring pilots that are maybe in their RPL stage or even through to CPL or an IFR stage. I remember having a chat with you. So Josh and I are probably 20 years difference in age, maybe a little bit more. And I remember having a chat with Josh. He just got his commercial ticket, and he was talking about going up north, and that's pretty common in Australia for new pilots, low-hour pilots, to head to Cairns or to Darwin and get some work out of those locations as their initial, and off you went. Tell us what happened. Mm-hmm. What were you flying, and what made you appealing to the organisation you ended up in, and maybe if you want to roll into your first twin job, or how that all eventuated, where you worked, what you added to these companies, what made you employable in your eyes, and then obviously, and maybe some of the challenges you met across the way too.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first job was in a remote community in the Northern Territory. I had a friend that worked there, and he gave me the insight of when to be in Darwin for interviews, and got the job. I wasn't there for too long, unfortunately. Just, whether it was, conflict of differences, or just the way I was living my life compared to the way it is out there. You're in a small community of a couple of thousand flying planes that, aren't incredible planes, but that's fair enough. That's aviation in that area. But it just didn't end up working out, and that's fine. It was probably a massive, is a wake up call, and also like a kick in the butt to really push a lot harder than I probably had been. I kind of felt like I got that one pretty easy. Mm-hmm. So, I did get a few hours out of it, but it wasn't anything incredible. But I was just flying a 172 in the Northern Territory out of a place called Gumbalanya. So it was a cool experience. I don't think I'd ever be able to go back to somewhere like that. But to say I've done it and I know what it's like to live in a little community, that's great, So I take what I can from that one. Mm-hmm. So I was there for just a few, I think 3, 4, 5 months, maybe something like that. And then I came back to the Sunshine Coast. I was still looking for work. I ended up working back at an athlete's sport that I had worked at previously, just for money purposes, so I could take care of my family. And then I got in the car from the Sunshine Coast, and I drove all the way to Cairns. and did every major city. So Rockhampton, Mackay, Proserpine, Whitsundays, Townsville, and then essentially Cairns. I stopped at all the airports and handed in resumes and did everything I could, spoke to whoever I could, and just trying to get an idea of what was going on. I had zero expectation that it would work. I was lucky I had family in Townsville, so I could essentially end up there and stay with them for a couple of days before driving back down to the Sunshine Coast. So it was a fun experience, I guess, but it was just daunting. You know, you're walking into these places that you have no idea who anyone's there. You don't even know if someone's there.
Yeah.
You know, you try and call ahead and organize interviews, but that's not always going to work. You don't know if they're even looking for people. At the time, it wasn't a hiring, bustling, aviation industry like it is now. It's just you get what you get, and it wasn't until the very last location that I went to in Cairns. It was called Daintree Air, and I went there. I had my brother with me because we had driven up from Townsville, and on the way up, we had gotten McDonald's for breakfast. And I was wearing a business shirt, and I spilled orange juice on it.
Oh no!
and I was like, "Oh, you're kidding me!" And I had a tie in the back, and I was like, "Oh, I'll put a tie on, and it will cover the couple of spots." And walked into Daintree Air's guy named Greg Latonda, amazing guy, incredibly hard worker, and he was on the phone for a little bit, and I just, stood, waited, and we had a chat, and we talked for about an hour, and we had a lot of common interests, and met a few of the guys that were there. It looked like a bit of a bustling, location, and he said at the end of it, there's it said about an hour, and at the end of it, he said, "Look, we'll hire you."
Wow.
I do have someone starting soon as well, but I do want you here. And that was kind of it. So it was funny because it really was the last place I was going to go to, and for it to work out that way was really, really good. It wasn't, nothing was in writing, nothing was, set in stone. It was just, you'd be great here. And yeah, so that's kind of how that first major job happened. And I ended up back on the Sunshine Coast, and then for about a week I would just keep calling him to see when he wanted me to come up. And I finally got onto him a week later, and he's like, "Yeah, come up and we'll get you going," and blah 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 blah.
That's awesome.
What I didn't realize is that there was another mate who's now a really, really good friend of mine named Tom. He started the exact same time. He just got his commercial license out of Townsville, and he was there first, so that's completely fine. So he was flying. I ended up being more of the bookings person. I ran their kind of IT, helped them with transporting passengers, cleaning aircraft, just anything that I was doing just to help out.
Mm-hmm.
And creating websites, making everything I could just to get more people into the door, because that's the only way we would fly planes, is if people came in the door.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I did that for 3 months unpaid.
Whoa. Hang on a sec. So, and I want to paint a bit of a picture here for the listeners. So Australians, they'll probably understand how far away Cairns is from Brisbane. And for those of you in Australia that don't, it's about 2,000 Ks. Roughly, which is
17 hours drive.
17 hours drive, about 1,200 miles for our non-metric listeners. So it's no small drive. It's a long way. It would have cost a fair chunk of change in fuel and accommodation, and obviously, as Josh has mentioned already, time. And then you've gone back up there and then worked for 3 months for nothing.
Yeah. I think he'd throw me $500 every now and again because I did something great. but yeah, it was essentially 3 months of no work. But there is a silver lining to it, was everyone that was there at the time, apart from one guy, was or casual work. And the way casual work works is you are paid per hour of flying. So you have to fly to get paid.
Right.
The other guy was full-time, so you got paid. And I think at the time it was maybe 36,000 Australian a year, something like that. And I guess I had done enough in those 3 months that when that 3 months came up, which was essentially the start of the financial year, from how I remember it, he then put me onto full-time. So I skipped the whole casual thing and just went straight to full-time.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, which was really helpful because it's cheaper for him to fly a full-time pilot than it is to fly a casual pilot. Mm-hmm. So I'm flying not much to then flying a lot. Mm. And yeah, and it was awesome. It was great fun. You know, we did scenic flights around the Great Barrier Reef. We did tours to Green Island and went snorkeling all day and then flew back, and we were the ones that were snorkeling and, you know, taking the people. Like, it's this dream job that if only it paid, you know, kind of what I earn kind of now, you would never leave because it's incredible. Apart from Cairns being extremely hot and humid, but just an incredible job that, you know, it's the kind of things you want to do when you know, start becoming a pilot, because they just don't exist anywhere else. And so I was with them for 2 years in total. And by the time I was leaving them, I had about 1,200 hours, I believe it was. So at that point, I only had my commercial license. I had nothing else. Didn't have any other ratings, had nothing. So at the time, my boss said it would be better if you waited to 1,000 hours and then you went and got your IFR, which is what I did. Mm-hmm. And I did that with Fast Aviation in
Lismore.
Lismore, that's the one there, the floods. Yeah, Lismore. So there's a group out of Lismore, and they were doing essentially you paid up front about $10,000 and you paid off the rest of the IFR, multi-engine IFR rating. And I could swallow that. I couldn't pay it all up front, but I could swallow that price. So I did that, and amazing guys. Those guys there were so good. And every time I did a renewal, I went straight back to them. They were just brilliant. I couldn't recommend them enough. Fast Aviation Lismore, just incredible. So I did that, and then from there, I was then introduced to another guy named Jack Hart, who was running Port Macquarie Air, and he was essentially running a cargo service out of Bankstown in Sydney as a feeder for Toll Aviation. Mm-hmm. So they were flying caravans and chieftains, and I really wanted to fly a caravan. That was kind of just my goal. And he would give you a caravan endorsement, so essentially a GT gas turbine endorsement for like $3,000, which included like 5 hours and a flight renewal and just experience in a caravan. And that was fine. Again, another price I had to swallow, but at that time I had a little bit of money from working, so that was okay. But it still did put a stretch on everything, but it was something I knew I had to do. And it came out worth it. It became worth it, I guess. So I did that. It was in Sydney, and we went down there. I went down there for like a weekend, knocked it all out, and just got the rapport with him and had a really good chat and had his number. He knew who I was. He knew, my personality. And then I didn't hear from him for about 6 months. So I'd gone back to Cairns at this point and was working in Cairns. The only problem with that job in the end was that it is quite repetitive. Mm-hmm. It's quite, it's the same track around the Great Barrier Reef that you're going to fly. You're going to fly it 7 times today. Apart from the passengers changing out, stuff like that, it's just a very repetitive job. So after, 1,000 hours of flying that same kind of route, unfortunately, it does get a little not as interesting. So I was losing a little bit of motivation, sadly. So I knew I needed to do something. And this was just before COVID. Like this was end of 2019.
Right.
And a couple of things happened all at once where I'd been selected to do a Cathay Airlines interview. And I did that in January 2020. And I got offered the job for that, which was an awesome experience as well. Spent a lot of time studying and with a group of guys in Melbourne that would run you through the process and get you ready for that interview, because it is known to be the hardest or one of the hardest interviews in the entirety of aviation.
Wow.
I the guys here in America, and they're like, yeah, that's nuts, that interview. And it was 2 days of just absolute grilling.
Wow.
And I loved it. Just loved it. And the guys that I was there in Hong Kong with there, I still talk to them today.
Yeah.
Like it was really, really good group of guys. So I got offered that. That was January. And then at the same time, Jack had called me back and said, hey, what are you doing? And I said, look, just in Cairns. I was doing a little bit of chieftain flying and just flying around the Great Barrier Reef in a Gippsland Aero GA8. And he said, hey, do you want to come fly chieftains for me? And I just said, yep, because I knew that it was a multi-job full-time and I could, get into it. And it was going to be cargo, and that was something different. So, and a lot of night flying. So, yeah, went down to Sydney and jumped on that and just started flying chieftains. And 3 weeks later, COVID hit the world.
Yeah.
So I don't know how I pulled it off, but it's the only aviation sector that became bigger. That
cargo.
Didn't stop completely.
Yeah.
Was just cargo. It just went berserk. And so yeah, I was flying nonstop for about 2 years. I did about 9. I hit legal limits every year.
Wow.
2 years. And with Jack, I flew chieftains, I flew caravans. I have 1,000 something hours command in a caravan now. But it's good. We were hiring at it was called Macquarie Air, and we were hiring, and I got my good friend from Cairns that started the same time I did.
Oh yeah.
Tom, I got him a job in Sydney, and so he came down maybe 6 months after I did. And then he got into it as well, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. Like apart from the COVID side of things, like that was obviously hell, but we were still flying, and we were doing a lot of flying and flying all around New South Wales. So it was good. I'm super, super grateful, and I love that company more than anything. Those guys are just the best. The two owners there, Jack and Justine, are incredible people. Just they care about you more than they care about anything, and that is it's such a nice feeling. And again, I would never leave them if I was earning the kind of money I was here. That's just brilliant people. So that's something I've noticed. There are really, really, really nice people in aviation.
I was going to mention, so you mentioned there during COVID, obviously freight and it went crazy. Mm-hmm. And you were flying legal limits. So for the listeners that aren't aviation buffs, it may come as a surprise to you to find out that pilots are only allowed to fly so many hours a year commercially. And that's basically, that comes down also to how many hours you can fly in a 24-hour period, and there's a few other regulations around that. So it's, I don't know, for people that I've spoken to, it's fairly rare to hear that a pilot's hitting their limits. Probably in the airline world, it happens fairly regularly. But maybe not so much in the early stages of flying, like to be hitting your legal limits and you've only been in the air for kind of 12 to 18 months is pretty extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just, it was extraordinary. I couldn't believe it. I felt it physically.
Oh, you would have been tired, yeah.
Yeah, it was very fatiguing. So the legal limit, and it depends what kind of job you're doing in aviation, because there are different areas. that come under the regulations of what you're allowed to fly and how much you're allowed to fly. But my legal limit was 900 hours per year on a revolving 365-day basis. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I was hitting that 900-hour mark. Pretty much after a year that I was there, I just kept hitting that 900 hours. I'd have to take a few days off or a week off so I could get some hours back on my side, and then I'd start flying again.
Right.
So, but it was good. Winter was a lot of night flying, and again, that kind of leads into where I come to America, because you need 100 hours night essentially, mm-hmm. but you need 100 hours night to then be able to work in America. And I was never going to get those hours outside of that job at that time. So if I didn't have that job during COVID, not a chance I'd be here where I am today. So, becomes full circle in it at the end of the day, and everything happens for a reason, and that one did. And yes, super, super thankful. And like I said, super thankful for Jack and Justina that were there. They are just such amazing people. Yeah.
Sound like the kind of people you want to work for, that's for sure.
Yeah, I would recommend them to anybody.
Well, and whilst my stint was fairly short-lived, I think there's a lot to be said for flying for people you trust, and in particular, flying for people whose aircraft you trust. Because it's your life that's on the line. It's you wanting to go home to your family at night. And if you speak that highly of company owners and their aircraft, then that, to me, speaks volumes to the type of people that they are. So, yeah, that's really good to hear. What we never talked about, or we never had the conversation deep enough, and probably because we're a bit of a difference in age and we didn't used to chill. So I never knew, you had a desire to go to America, plus you went off to Sydney for a couple of years, and basically I didn't have contact with you, but, that's okay. I didn't cry too much, Josh.
I didn't see any of my family for 2 years.
Yeah, that's a grind, that's for sure.
Yeah, I missed weddings, missed birthdays, missed everything for 2 years. So,
when I don't feel so bad then. When did this America thing drop into your head?
This had dropped into my head in Cairns. So maybe a year into having my commercial license, I had come across a guy on YouTube that was flying in America, and it was just awesome. There were so many routes, there were so many bases, you went to all these places. You were flying jets at 1,500 hours, that's unheard of in Australia, especially at that time. And I just loved the idea of it. And it's such a big country, and it's comparable to Australia, but there's just so much more. There's
you got stuff in the middle. We don't have stuff in the middle.
Exactly. There's 26 million people in Australia. There's like 320 million in America.
Yeah.
So it's just a different kettle of fish. And aviation's the same. It's 20 times bigger in America than it is in Australia. So it was always, on my mind to do it. It was going over to another country. That was exciting. Just doing something different, just getting away, flying jets faster than having to wait for Qantas or Virgin to, say yes. And then at the same time, I would still be flying to Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne,
the milk run.
That's fair enough. That's just how it is. But, it was, one day I'm in New York, the next day I'm in Miami, and then I'm in LA, then I'm in, Chicago. That's, you're hitting, top 10 most busiest airports in the world.
Yeah.
And that was just unfathomable to me. I couldn't imagine that would be a possibility. So that was, a long time in the making, a long time in the process. But it was, if Cathay had worked out, I imagine I would be there. If it wasn't for COVID and, it all just happened, that's fine. I think I would have ended up at Cathay Pacific, which would have been great as well. But America was always the first one to be an idea. So it was when America opened back up and I had everything I needed, and America was hiring Australian pilots again. So just those few things had to happen, and when they did is when I jumped on board that. Yeah.
And so did you come straight to Frontier Airlines then?
No, so I went to a place called GoJet Airlines, and I was there with a lot of other Australians. It seemed to be a place that Australians were gravitating to because they just kept hiring and hiring and hiring. So, and it was a good introduction into America. I came over in January 2022 and did the ATP, which is essentially a multi-crew course in Australia. Mm-hmm. So you do about a week of classroom work, and then you do 10 hours in a simulator. And they put you in different aircraft simulators. It's not so much about the aircraft; it's about the multi-crew facet of flying.
Right.
And this is and then another thing that became full circle is that I ended up in an A320 for 8 hours and a 737 for 2 hours
in the sim.
In the sim when I was doing my ATP course.
Right.
And I was doing it here in Dallas. Actually, I just passed the hotel that I stayed at, and I was telling the captain I'm with. But that's when I fell in love with an A320. Just absolutely fell in love with it. And the instructor that I had as well was an ex-F-16 pilot from Greece. And he was awesome. He was incredible. And because of that, I then fell in love with it more. So flying an A320 became the thing I wanted to do. And that's then how I somewhat ended up here at Frontier after that. So, but I spent 8 months at GoJet. I didn't fly a whole lot. There was just a large amount of first officers compared to captains. Mm-hmm. So you sit on reserve, and I just didn't get used. So I flew 140 hours in 8 months, I think was what I ended up with. So a whole lot and not much.
And what airframes were you flying there?
So it was called a CRJ 550. It's based off the CRJ 700. It just has 50 seats.
Right.
And the whole big reason why that happens, but it's essentially a scope clause for United Airlines. And it was great fun because it's a lot lighter than the original aircraft, but it has the same engine, so it's just as powerful. Mm-hmm. So it's just a little rocket. And I did a lot of flying between New York and Washington and some Chicago flying, and just St. Louis, like that kind of box area is where they work around. So it was great fun. Like I said, it had a lot of Australian guys that were there. So, we all relied on each other, but the industry in America was really, really starting to pick up at that point as well, because the legacies, the Uniteds, Americans, and Deltas were really hiring again. So everyone started leaving. And I put my application out to a couple of other airlines to see if they would, if it would work. And it has to be airlines that hire E3 pilots. So it does limit me in what I can get. But in saying that, I've been extremely, extremely happy with what I've got.
So just to unpack that, is an E3, is that part of like a working visa or something like that?
Yeah. So it came about because of a treaty between America and Australia because of World War II. So it's called a professional visa. It doesn't involve just pilots. It involves a few jobs, a few industries. But you essentially have to have a certain amount of experience and come under a certain category, and then you're able to apply for it. And the company has to sponsor it, and the government has to allow it. So a few things have to happen, but it's a fairly common practice now, these days. So a lot of airlines in America are actually doing them. So yeah.
Cool. So you're kind of restricted to those that would do that. And I'm guessing too, you may not have done this, but in my mind, restricting those to airlines that flew A320s.
Somewhat. Somewhat. It seemed that the ones that were doing it flew A320s at the time.
Oh, well,
so it was fine. It was fine. But yeah, it was good that it worked out that way. I don't think I would ever fly a 737 personally, but if I had to, I would, but it's definitely not a plane I'm excited about in any way after being in them times. So, yeah, grateful for the guys at Fly 'em that get me home, but that's about as far as I'm going to go with those things. So, yeah.
Never say never, Josh. Never say never.
No, you never can, because you never know when they'll bite you.
That's right.
Yeah. So I didn't fly a whole lot in GoJet. I was there for about 8 months, 140 hours, and then I came to Frontier, and that was in November last year. And after all the training, I think I got checked in January this year and started flying end of January this year, and then started flying in March. And then I just haven't stopped then. And the good thing about where I am now is that there is just so much flying and so much that you can pick up. So again, there's legal limits in America that you're only allowed to fly so many hours per month, per 7-day period per year.
Mm-hmm.
And I made an effort to fly as much as I physically could. So I flew 101 hours in 31 days, in the first 31 days that I worked. And then I flew hours in 43 days here than I did in 8 months at GoJet.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
That's really impressive. And did you get to choose your base, or were you allocated Las Vegas?
So you are allocated at your initial induction when you start with the company. It's just where they need people. Mm-hmm. But you're also able to, not instantly because it takes 3 months, but you're also able to bid another base straight away. And if you're awarded that base, because there's available slots, once you're awarded it, 3 months down the track is when you'll be put into that base.
Right.
So that included the time in training as well. So most people that wanted out of Vegas, I think they ended up in Vegas for maybe 1 month, and then they were moved to the base that they originally picked or wanted, or was their second or third choice that just didn't want Vegas at all. So, but yeah, you are assigned a base initially, but it changes every course. So they do a course once a month between 50 and 60 people, and sometimes it's Miami, sometimes it's Denver, sometimes it's a mix of Vegas, Miami, Denver, Phoenix. It's just wherever they need people at that time is where they will assign you. So yeah.
Right. And you lucked out with Vegas.
Yeah, lucked out, and I think lucked into as well, because Vegas for this company is where the most flying happens. So the most amount of block hours is in Vegas. And because it's such a junior base, the rotation and churn is quite high. So I shot up in seniority really, really fast. So
because you stayed
now,
there.
Yeah. So now I've always held what they call a line. So you have reserve flying and line flying. A line is where there is flying put on your schedule from the start. You don't have to sit at home and wait for someone to call you. Like, you're assigned to that flight. Mm-hmm. And that's where quality of life comes into it. So I've had that from day one because of how much of a churning it happens in Vegas. But now I actually just did my bid for next month, October, and I'm at 44% seniority in Las Vegas. So it's been really, really good. Very lucky to be here. And I've just tried to make the most of it as well, and just flying as much as I possibly could.
And that probably leads into my next question, and that's to ask, where to from here? So what are your long-term goals, and where do you see yourself in 5-10 years? What do you see yourself flying?
Yeah, it is hard. It's really, really hard because you don't know what's happening, in a month or a year from now in aviation. COVID is back along and, wipes out everything again, so it's hard to be certain about what I would be doing. But I think after getting to where I am now, I would like to stay in this company, and I do love this company. It's been a lot of fun and given me a lot so far. So I'd like to be here. Captain upgrade is not going to take too long, 2 years in total, which is another thing compared to Australia, which I think back when I left was like 12. So
Yeah.
12 years compared to 2 years, I'd rather take 2 years. Thank you. So 2 years as a captain, 2 years to become a captain, and then to become a line check airman on top of that. That's another 500 hours as a captain. You can then apply for that position. And I'd love to do that. I'd love to teach the guys how to fly an Airbus and be with them as they start flying in this kind of world, because it is different compared to where a lot of people are coming from. So I'd like to be a part of that and just see where that goes. I'd love to get into recruiting. I was flying with a recruiter the other day, and he was telling me about what he does, and I remember him from when I did my interview, and it was just a lot of fun, and being responsible for where the company goes in the future by the people that you hire. That sounds like a lot of fun to me, and a big responsibility, which I'd like to have. So yeah, I think just continuing with where I am now is kind of the goal. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I should try do Emirates, but then I speak to a lot of Emirates pilots, and they're like, nah. A lot of ex-Emirates guys. Maybe they're ex-Emirates guys for a reason. I don't know, but there's a few of them in America, and they'll be like, nah, don't do that. You'll be fine. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then and then I go to a lot of airports where I see a lot of bigger aircraft, A350s, 777s, and such, and that would be really, really fun. But again, I actually don't like flying for a long period of time. Like 6 hours is, I think, my limit. After that, I'm just exhausted, and it's not fun. So flying long haul cargo, long haul, international isn't really that interesting to me anymore. I like the 2 to 3 hour flights there. That's a good amount of takeoff and landings and a little bit of fun. So
that's it. That's really cool. I'd love like you said, you don't know what's around the corner as far as the world and as far as aviation goes, and none of us are in control of that. The fact that you've found home away from home in Vegas, and I believe you've got a little baby now, so it makes sense in my mind anyway. Being a fairly older conservative kind of guy, it makes sense that you get to have the family life, but it sounds like an incredible opportunity for a career path within Frontier Airlines, flying an airframe that you love.
Yeah, they do give you a lot of opportunity, and there is a lot of opportunity here. I think I was saying to you prior to us starting that they have an order book of actually 200 plus aircraft. So I think this quarter, so these 3 months, we're getting 6 aircraft. Next year is another 30 something aircraft, and they're all brand new. Frontier has the youngest airframe life in America, which is pretty fun. So I've flown planes that are, not so much 5 days old, but once they get to America and they actually start flying, they've only been flying for 5 days.
Far out.
And I'm flying.
Awesome.
You could be some places in Australia flying planes that are 18, 20 years old.
Yeah.
So we don't actually have a plane that old. I think our oldest was 8 years old.
Wow.
So
it's all new metal.
Yeah, all new metal. All the engines are essentially Neos. I think we have 5 CEOs, which were the current engine options, which were older aircraft. The planes that essentially Jetstar fly. Right. So they've started getting some Neo aircraft, but 90% of our fleet are Neo. So it's all really efficient aircraft as well. So that's always been really cool. So it's a great place. We fly to a lot of places. We fly internationally to the Caribbeans and Mexico and Guatemala and Puerto Rico and Jamaica, and there's a lot of opportunity, and I think it will just get better. So I can't see a real big reason to turn away from it. We're in contract negotiations, and everyone has been in the airlines in America for the last couple of years, and ours have kicked into gear now. So just better work rules and more money, and can't complain about that. So
no, well, it sounds like you're in a very positive place, that's for sure.
Yeah, I believe so.
What bit of a loaded question, so I don't know, you might need to think about it a little bit unless you've already given it some thought. What challenges or concerns do you foresee in that journey that you're going to have to overcome, apart from, you're going to need a certain amount of hours to become a captain or whatever it might be? What other challenges do you see that you might have to go and do a bit of extra study for, or something like that?
Yeah, so you're always studying, and if you're not, you're kind of putting yourself in a bad situation. So we do get checked twice a year, but that's fairly standard in airlines. So that I wouldn't count that as a concern or anything. I think the biggest concern is just job security.
Right.
My job relies on the E3 visa to be current and to continue with that company. And they're hiring that many people that I do believe they will continue it, or at least keep renewing it. It would be more for them to lose me than to get rid of their visa. So I do feel good about that part of it, but that is a concern that I would have for that. But in saying that, that's okay, because I'm getting a lot of hours in airlines, and that does transfer around the world. And an A3 is, the most, if not the second most, flown aircraft on planet Earth. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of places that I could go. So that's great. But yeah, just opportunity, just timing. As long as they keep hiring, as long as they keep growing, there's no massive recession that would, kill a lot of the industry off. Just things like that. A lot of the economy does affect how aviation works. But I think COVID has also pushed it to a point where people really just want to start traveling again. And that's what happened for a lot of years, and it's still happening today.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, like we were in, so yesterday I flew out of Orange County in California, so just below Los Angeles, and they call it Santa Ana, there's another name for it. And we had an oversold flight to go to Dallas. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, I can't believe so many people want to go to Dallas. Yeah, but it's nothing. Like, that is absolutely nothing. 180 people in America is peanuts. So we're always flying full planes. Our new aircraft that we're getting, but have a few of, about 20. The A321 Neos, we have 240 seats in those aircraft. And that's comparable to some of the 787-800 aircraft that bigger airlines fly. Same amount of people.
Wow.
So, we're really packing them in an aircraft, but, you're responsible for 240 people flying across the country, and that's a lot of fun. It's a lot of, not stress, but, it's a lot of responsibility. And I find that I really, really enjoy that side of aviation. And cool. As long as all that keeps going, then everything should work out quite well. And yeah, so yeah, I'll take with whatever comes. I can deal with it. Having a good reserve of good reserves of rainy day money is always helpful.
Yes, definitely.
If anything is to ever happen. But yeah, I think everything else is looking pretty good at the moment. And I hope it stays that way. I'll do whatever I can to make it stay that way. But aviation will continue going forever. Everyone wants to travel. So
yeah,
if I have to move countries again, it's that's fine. It's exciting.
Oh, there was one question I was going to ask, and thank you for sharing that. And I understand the boat got rocked with COVID, and things are fairly unsettled still. And there's a lot in the world that aviation will be impacted by that you're just not in control of. So you really do just have to do your best and go along for the ride. But I'm really excited by your opportunities at Frontier. I'll be completely honest with you, I hardly knew they existed until I started to catch up with where you were and saw that you were flying for Frontier, and that sounds really, really promising. The fact that there's that many aeroplanes on the order books and you're flying with full planes, it's very, very positive.
It's a smaller airline. It's comparable to a Jetstar, where it's just their low-cost carrier in America. But even as a smaller airline, we have 130 aircraft at the moment, so comparable to Australia, it's quite large. but in America, quite small. When you have other airlines that have like 500-600 aircraft,
Right.
I think Southwest Airlines just hit 800 737s.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just, when I say America's just bigger in aviation, it's just that much bigger.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, so it is a smaller airline that's, just kind of slowly building itself up. We've been around for a while, but comparable to a lot of other airlines, yeah, quite small, but still an order book of a couple hundred aircraft, and that's exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
Hopefully I fit in that.
Well, to round this out, I'm going to throw a couple of questions at you, some quick fire questions. So if you're ready for those, I'll shoot them.
Go for it.
Okay, so the first one is, can you tell us about a memorable experience you had flying a particular aircraft and what made it special to you?
I think the first time I flew a Chieftain by myself was pretty memorable. My first twin. That was a pretty big deal. I remember my very first solo in Caloundra. That was a really, really big deal. That was, I know people might not get it, and people that have done it will probably get it. But that sense of freedom in flying a plane is exhilarating. Like, it was like nothing else. And I think it's either I loved that so much that I didn't stop, or I was too stupid to stop. So I just didn't stop. And that's where I am today. So I don't know which one it is, but that was extremely exciting. And then the first time I flew an Airbus, with people and being responsible for that. I flew from Las Vegas to Orange County, and I thought, this is wild. This is nuts.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't believe that you're allowed to do it, really. Yeah. Yeah. It feels
a bit like parenthood. I don't know how many times my wife and I've gone, how many have I got? 5. I've got 5 kids. We've got 5 kids. But how do we become parents? Who let us become parents? So you're flying an airliner, Josh, with 240 people on board. They let you do it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You're doing 600 kilometers an hour, 800 or 700 kilometers an hour through the air, and you just 240 people behind you. And that's just like, you don't really think about it when you're doing it. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going through your mind, but I guess when you do get to stop and look at that kind of aspect of what you're actually doing, it's a little bit like, oh, geez, don't want to screw up.
Well, and the reality is, and the airlines aren't stupid, and they have to pay the insurance premiums, right? So they look at your history and what you've been through and what kind of person you are, and they go, yep, this is the kind of person we need flying the aeroplane. So,
yeah. No, they are really good, and a lot of the airlines in America were doing like Zoom interviews, and then you'd get a job offer from a Zoom interview.
Wow.
Frontier was different. You actually went to Denver for the day, and you did an exam. They checked all your logbooks and licenses, and then you did a situational based interview. So you're in a paper cockpit with another guy, and they just threw situations at you. And then you did a panel interview after that. So it was a really thorough process. And in my mind, that weeds out a lot of what you don't want.
Yeah.
So I knew I would be with people that are people that should be here. And I really, really appreciated that. So that was one of the reasons that I came here.
And how did, not so much a comparison thing, but more so probably maybe even from a preparation perspective, how did that Frontier recruiting process compare to the Cathay recruiting process? And it kind of, to me, it goes without saying that going through that Cathay process a couple of years earlier probably was a massive preparation for getting the gig with Frontier. Would you agree?
Yeah. So in comparison of like difficulty, like maybe half, maybe even less.
Wow, so Cathay really was that grueling.
It's ridiculous.
Right.
yeah, Cathay, you do a whole sim, you do a whole sim session in an A330, and they make you fly an ILS into Hong Kong raw data and do a go around.
Wow.
Memorize all the call outs and profiles prior to going to Hong Kong. Like that alone for a person that has never flown an airliner and doesn't know what a profile is and doesn't know the call outs and has never flown a raw data ILS on a PFD, ridiculous, so if you went into that situation without knowing what you were doing, really, really did, like if you got through that, you were brilliant. You are really, really good. I remember I paid for a simulator session with an ex-Qantas A330 pilot because I wanted to know what was going to happen. I was not going to go there without knowing what I was getting into, and I'm glad I did. That was a big reason, I think, why I was successful in that instance. But I do agree that going through Cathay first, I just have an idea of what's going to happen, or I have an idea of what I'm going to say to certain questions because I'd been through them so many times in my head and written them down and said them out loud and was doing mock interviews with people. I had just done so much preparation prior to Cathay that anything that's happened after that, I've already got those kind of, like I said, answers to certain questions, or a lot of airline industry interviews are tell me a time that, so very similar to this, tell me a time that this happened, tell me a time that happened, what's something you could have done better, what's something you got yourself in a situation that you probably shouldn't have, have you ever broken any rules? When have you had to deal with a passenger, when have you had to deal with all that kind of stuff? And I'd had those situations in my career. It's just verbalizing them and putting them into a structured response. And that was the practice that I'd been given in preparation to the Cathay interview.
Right.
So I just kept using those same basic skills and techniques in every other interview that I've done so far. And I've been offered jobs at every other interview that I've done. It's just I just didn't take them.
You opened the right door. You walked through the right door.
Yeah, I just chose Frontier over the other ones that were on offer, and I'm glad I did. I'm sure the other guys would have been amazing as well, but for me, this one's worked out really, really well.
Awesome. You alluded earlier on to flying what I consider to be the princess of the skies, but that's probably because I haven't flown an A320, the Caravan. That you would take that plane back into conditions that you perhaps wouldn't fly another plane. My next question might relate to one of these experiences, and that's what's one of your most fear-filled flight experiences?
Yeah. I'm sure I'm not in Australia now anyway, so I can't get in trouble. But
well, be careful. Be careful what you say.
Yeah, it'd be impossible to prove it anyway, but that's fine. But obviously cargo is a big deal too, because there's no one on board. That helps. Because I would never take people in these situations, but cargo is it's just another world. And people that have flown in cargo or fly cargo, you understand it, where you can do a lot more, because the plane still flies. That's the big thing that I think everyone misses. Like, the plane will still fly in most situations, nearly every situation. If it's bumpy, lightning, rain, can't see anything, it doesn't matter. The plane still flies.
You just need wind across the wing, right?
Yeah. So, and that was a big thing I learned from my old boss, was that, there's a lot of situations you might get into, but just trust the plane. Like, the plane will still fly, and you know how to fly a plane, so just do your job. So I think it was just before I left Sydney, actually, and it definitely was my, not riskiest, but it definitely was the worst weather situation I've ever been in. A score line essentially just went through New South Wales from west to east, and I was in a place called Hay, which is west of Griffith and Wagga Wagga. And I was flying a route back to Sydney, and you do about 6 stops on the way. And I'll admit I was a little bit, I knew the weather was there. That wasn't my problem. I think I hadn't checked the NOTAMs, which everyone tells you to do. And, a pilot that's been flying long enough will tell you they don't always do it. Mm-hmm. And if they tell you they do, I promise you they're lying. So that's it. They're lying. So I just didn't check the NOTAMs for Griffith Airport. Flew there from Hay. It's about an hour. And when I got there, the runway was completely flooded. So not a big deal. I had plenty of fuel. That was no issues or something like that. But I was meant to go there and pick up freight. So you get there and you're like, oh, geez. So I still have photos of it because I couldn't believe it, that this whole runway is just flooded and everything around it's flooded. But the storm was there for only like 20 minutes.
Wow.
So obviously
a lot of rain.
And it just wasn't going away. So you're on the phone calling your boss, you're on the phone calling the freighter guy, the courier on the ground, being like, hey, I can't land. I'm going to go to the next place. Do you want to meet me there? And, then I started getting onto all the weather and NOTAMs and being like, all right, can I actually land at the next place? Can I go to Wagga? Can I go to everywhere else that I have to go? And that was good. But then flying into that weather was pretty crazy. I've never seen so much lightning in my life. The sky was practically blue the entire time. But again, I kind of tell people this, but I just don't look outside at that point. I just kind of put my head down, look at the instruments, and just don't pay attention because the plane's still going to fly. Whether it's sunny outside, raining outside, lightning outside, the plane's still going to fly. So I just kind of didn't look outside, so it didn't really bother me. But I do remember the thing that got me the most was I was flying from Wagga back to Sydney direct because I was meant to go somewhere else, but I refused to go there because of its location and proximity to mountains and the weather that was there at that time. I just refused to do it. And the runway was small. It's a place called Cootamundra, and the runway is really small and the lighting is horrible. And that was a situation I wasn't willing to get myself into. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to fly directly from Wagga back to Bankstown, and flying over the mountains, I could still see the ground fair enough at like 7,000 feet. So it's just lightning and clouds and a little bit of rain. But it was the turbulence that started really getting me. And I was IFR, so obviously you have to maintain an altitude. And there's a thing you can do called getting a block altitude, so you're allowed anywhere in a certain altimeter setting area. Mm-hmm. So I set 7,000 to 9,000. And by the time I'd said that, and he had replied back to me that I was cleared, I was already at 9,000 feet.
Oh, wow.
But I was trying to stay at 7.
Yeah.
But I was already. So at that point, you kind of just don't try and fight it. You just go with it. It's just waves. That's just how it works. And as long as I kept the plane level, whether it went up or down within margin, obviously, I was happy to let it do that. Of course, I would never have someone on the plane with me that I would do that with. I would never have gone into that situation because it's not comfortable. I definitely hit my head a couple of times. That hurt.
And were you in a van or a Chieftain then?
Yeah, in a van. I don't think I would have done that in a Chieftain. I'm sure a Chieftain could do it, but I just have more trust in a Caravan to do it. And the Caravans that we were flying had an upgraded engine on them, so they were quite powerful for what they were. So I knew that I could get out of any situation comfortably. But yeah, the weather is always the worst part of it. I think the biggest difference was coming from that world where I was flying through anything and everything because I was in the aircraft. It was just me. I wasn't responsible for anyone else in the aircraft. It was just boxes, and a lot of it was rural. Coming into airline industry where you go around nearly every cloud. So, you avoid clouds like they're the plague. So I was like, really? We're going to go around that? He's like, yep. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're going around that one. When you fly 500 knots across the ground and you'll be out of it in 15 seconds, but, you don't want to make the passengers in the back uncomfortable.
Don't want to stress them out and,
exactly.
Spill their drink.
Okay. Yeah, and if it's their first time flying, that's obviously quite scary. You don't want crazy turbulence. So you go around everything. You're always asking about what's the rides like. You'll always hear that on the radio. What's the rides like at 36,000 feet, 38,000 feet? you'll check on to the next frequency and they'll be like, oh, it should be smooth ahead, should be light turbulence ahead, should be turbulence for 20 miles, you'll be sweet. Just stuff like that's all you get told all the time because everything is revolved around passenger comfort. So that's just a whole 180 of what I was doing in Australia. So that took a minute to get into my head that that's how it should be. But other than that, it's been good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
This next question, I'm not going to preempt it with anything because I don't want to put any seeds in your head. If you were given an expense-free opportunity to be endorsed on any airframe, which would it be and why?
Good question. I used to think it would be some sort of big airline, like airline A380, 777, A350, brand new A330s. But I've learned that no matter what you're in, the cockpits all look fairly the same, and flying at 38,000 feet all looks the same. So whether it's a big plane, small plane, they all feel the same. They really do. So honestly, if I was to fly anything these days, I'd love to get my L39 Albatross rating.
Oh yeah.
It's actually a plan of mine. I haven't told the wife about that one yet, but that's fine. She doesn't have to worry about it.
She just found out.
Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely one I would love to get. Any fighter jet would be incredible. That kind of like thrill-seeking, kind of really fast aircraft would be a lot of fun. But I think an L39 kind of is the good balance between the both of those two things that I could legally fly comfortably.
That's cool.
I would love to do a seaplane rating as well. I think that's very easy to do here in America, and that's definitely one of the next things that I'll do is get a seaplane rating because I think that's just really cool landing on water.
Yeah.
Not many people can do that. So
no, you land well. I mean, you can't land anywhere, but you can certainly land a lot more places than just the designated runways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember I used to see them in Bankstown. There used to be the seaplane caravans that would do the tours around the harbour, and they would land in Bankstown for their maintenance. And they're awesome. They're so cool, and I reckon that would be a lot of fun. Something different, just to try it. They have done it.
100%. Lastly, what advice would you give to someone? You've given a heck of a lot of advice, which has been really insightful and awesome. Is there any other advice you'd give someone who's just starting out in aviation and perhaps what resources or support systems you'd recommend they seek out?
Yeah. On top of what I've already said, I'm not going to say the way I did it was definitely the best way to do it. But whatever it takes to get to the commercial stage, I would do anything. If I had to do my time again, I would do whatever it takes to get to the commercial license part of aviation so I could legally fly and be paid to do that. Mm-hmm. And then everything after that is just who you know, who you meet, and how hard you work. So that's what I would say is get to commercial as quick as possible, like as quick as you can, using any money that either your parents, yourself, the government, whatever it took. I would get to that point and then kind of work your way from there, similar to what I did. And as a support system, people that are in aviation already, everyone's done something that you're about to do before you. So just have a chat to people, ask questions, be friendly, stay in contact with people, build rapport. If you don't want to have a bad name in the industry, especially in Australia, that's quite small. So really be friendly, be nice, be a hard worker, and just understand that you probably have to work harder than you probably think you will have to at the start. But the more you work harder, the less you have to work in the future. And that is, I couldn't explain how much that is true because I do 1/10 of the work that I used to do when I used to fly 172s and airvans around the Great Barrier Reef. Like, this job is 1/10 of the work, but it's 10 times the pay. So it's a really weird system how that works, but that's just how it works. So just go through the motions and get to where you want to go to, but also don't rush to get to an airline. I see a lot of people do that, and I tell them stories about what I've done, and they're like, wow, that's sick. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, I've never done anything like that. Oh, that would be fun. Oh, this or that. But all they've known is instructing airline. That's it.
Yeah, right.
And I just don't think you get the experiences of aviation, true aviation, when you do that. And so don't rush it. Don't rush it at all. It will happen. I'm 29. I have 36 years to fly an airline from now on. That's more than enough time to, fly around the world, earn plenty of money and fly in the airlines. Between 36 years and 42 years, nothing is going to be different at the end of that. But at least I have 6 years of GA experience behind me that I can look back on it and really enjoy those memories and experiences, and use those experiences to help me in the future of what I might, come across in the airlines. So don't rush it. Definitely don't rush it. And don't try and be in an airline as soon as possible, because you probably won't love it. Because you really do have to love aviation to really to deal with a lot of its problems sometimes. Because a lot of people don't talk about. You are away a lot. You do miss a lot of things that you can't control. Again, I missed the opportunity. I missed not the chance or opportunity, but I missed our scheduled time yesterday because of flying. So that, and if that's a birthday, if that's a wedding, if that's a life event, you just can't control that. And you can't just turn around and be like, oh, well, I'm just going to leave anyway. Okay, well, then you just lose your job. So it's just one of those things that a lot of people don't always talk about or always understand, the difficult side of aviation. And then that also goes onto your family. If you're in aviation and you have a family, they suffer because of it. They're alone. They're looking after kids on their own. They're, dealing all of that stuff on their own because you're away. Like, that's just how it is. So have a really, really good support system and really good understanding of what you're getting into before you commit to that, because it's expensive. And if you go back on it, it takes a lot of time away from your life and money. So, yeah.
That's great advice, Josh. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap it up?
Just thank you to everyone that's ever helped me. I've had more help than I could ever imagine, with the people that I've worked with and the people that I know, family, and just advice that I've gotten from people as well, my own family. And thank you for dealing with everything that I've put them through in trying to become what I am now. Obviously it's paid off. So it's worth it in the end. But, I know there was some points in the past that it felt like a distant goal that was never going to be achieved. So, but I am super, super thankful to everyone that has helped me, and more than happy to help younger people in aviation as well. Or if, somebody wants to get into the American aviation side of things as well, I'm more than happy to help them. But yeah, if you ever want to reach out, just more than welcome to, and I'll point you in the right direction.
Wonderful. As this episode touches down, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Josh for sharing his remarkable journey, and certainly remarkable it is. From mastering the skies over the Sunshine Coast, over the outback of New South Wales, to piloting the Airbus A321 above the glittering lights of Vegas, his story encapsulates the enchanting magic of pursuing dreams that span continents and oceans. Thanks so much, Josh, for speaking to us from your hotel room in Dallas, Texas. Really, really appreciate you finding the time and really making the time. Really appreciate you rescheduling to today so that we could hear that story. There will be young pilots that will get so much out of that. Even as an old guy, I got so much out of that. So thanks so much for being so open and for sharing that with us.
Very, very welcome. I'm glad I could do it.
Join us next time for more fascinating discussions. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform, and if you'd like to help out, feel free to leave a review. That'll help spread the word. Alternatively, you can listen to the podcast on the HiflyMedia YouTube channel. Music for the podcast is titled Dance With Me by Asher Lee, available at upbeat.io. The HiflyMedia podcast, uncovering the people and passion behind aviation, one story at a time.